Welcome to Order Before Modern Systems. Here, we explore how everyday order functioned before modern systems, institutions, and formal rules existed. This channel examines how routine, habit, and shared expectations shaped daily life long before modern organization took form. In modern life, when we think about order, we often picture official systems, police departments, written laws, courts with trained judges, prisons, professional investigators. But for most of human history, everyday order did not come mainly from professionals. It came from routine. Routine means repeated actions that people expect. It can be daily, weekly, seasonal, or tied to important events like markets, harvests, or religious days. Routine does not replace law. But routine often did the basic work that modern systems do today. It reduced uncertainty, made behavior more predictable, and gave communities simple ways to respond when something went wrong. This video explains how routine created order in everyday life before modern law enforcement. We will look at several historical settings. The goal is not to tell dramatic stories, but to explain how these systems functioned and why repetition mattered. First, we need a clear idea of what order means in this context. Order is not the same as peace. A place can be orderly and still have violence, unfairness, or harsh punishments. Order simply means that people can predict what will happen most of the time. They know the usual steps for solving disputes. They know who is responsible for what. They know what kind of behavior will bring consequences. In many pre-modern societies, the strongest tool for creating predictability was not a large force of officers. It was a shared schedule of duties and obligations that ordinary people carried out again and again. Routine worked like a system with three main parts. 1. Regular roles. Certain people were expected to do certain tasks, not once, but repeatedly, often for a term of months or a year. 2. Regular gatherings. Courts, councils, assemblies, or inspections happened on set days, in set places. 3. Regular consequences. Fines, public penalties, restitution, or collective liability followed familiar patterns. When these parts stayed stable over time, the community learned them the way you learn the rules of a game. Even if written law existed, many people experienced justice mainly as these repeated steps. Now let us begin with one of the clearest examples, medieval and early modern England, where order depended heavily on routine duties shared by local communities. In medieval England, the central government was limited by distance, slow travel, and low staffing. Royal officials could not be everywhere, so the system relied on local responsibility. One important method was mutual responsibility through groups. A well-known example is Frank Pledge. In this system, groups of households were tied together in a structure of shared accountability. The idea was simple. If one man in the group was accused of wrongdoing, the group was responsible for producing him to face the process. If they failed, the group could be fined. This created pressure to monitor one another and to avoid sheltering offenders. It also encouraged people to keep track of who belonged in the community and who did not. This was not only a rule, it was a routine. Men were organized, expected, and checked. The system worked best when it was practiced repeatedly, so that participation became normal. A key routine connected to this was the view of Frank Pledge. Local courts held periodic sessions where they reviewed whether people were properly enrolled and whether obligations were being met. These were not daily police patrols. They were scheduled checkpoints. But the predictable timing mattered. People knew there would be regular moments when order was inspected. Another routine was watch and ward. The basic purpose was to guard the community. The watch commonly referred to night duties, and ward to daytime responsibilities. What matters for our topic is that these were not special emergency actions. They were expected duties. In many places, ordinary residents were obligated to take part, either directly or through arrangements made by local officials. Because these duties were repeated, they produced a steady effect. Even if the watch was not perfect, the idea that the community had a normal method for guarding its streets reduced uncertainty. It also provided a standard response when something seemed wrong. Then there was the hue and cry. The hue and cry was a community alarm used when a crime was witnessed or discovered, and the offender fled. The expectation was that people who heard the call would join the pursuit. The pursuit could move from one place to another, with communities expected to continue it. This is an important point. The hue and cry was a routine in the sense that it was a known procedure. It was not professional investigation in the modern sense. It was a shared emergency drill built into normal life. A major reason routine mattered here is speed. Before modern forensic science and databases, many cases depended on catching someone quickly. Routine created fast coordination. People knew the steps: raise alarm, pursue, hand the person over to the proper authority. Even the threat of collective responsibility mattered. In some arrangements, a wider local area could face consequences if robbery was not addressed. That increased pressure to act. Now consider the role of local courts. In many pre-modern settings, courts did more than decide serious crimes. They were also administrative routines that kept community life organized. Manorial courts and courts leit are examples of local institutions that handled many small matters: local standards, nuisances, minor disputes, and presentments of wrongdoing. These courts did not meet every day. Often they met only a few times a year, sometimes annually. But because they met in a regular pattern, people could plan around them. Regular court days did something powerful. They created a predictable calendar for conflict. Instead of every dispute turning into endless personal revenge, the community had a known time and place where issues could be brought forward. That reduced uncertainty. It also reduced the number of disputes that stayed unresolved for long periods. Another important routine was the use of fines, also called amercements in English legal history. Fines served several purposes. They punished, they compensated, and they helped fund local or lordly administration. But for our topic, the key point is that fines were often assessed through known processes, sometimes involving local men under oath. This repeated method helped keep punishments from feeling completely random, even if they were still unequal by status. When people know the usual range of penalties and the usual way they are decided, behavior becomes more predictable. Over time, England moved towards stronger roles for constables and justices of the peace. The justice of the peace, often drawn from local elites, handled many minor matters in structured sessions. Petty sessions and quarter sessions reflected a regular rhythm. Some issues were handled frequently and locally, while others were handled on a larger schedule. The important part is that the timetable itself created a steady channel for law enforcement. So in this English example, routine created order through repeated roles: constables, watchmen, tithing structures, repeated gatherings, court sessions, views, inspections, and repeated consequences, fines and other penalties. Now let us shift to a very different setting: ancient Rome. Rome is often remembered for written law and large government. But even Rome struggled with the basic problem that every city faces: how do you keep order, especially at night in crowded streets? One Roman answer was the vigiles. Under the Emperor Augustus, Rome developed a corps of vigiles who served as firefighters and watchmen. Their most famous job was fire control, but they also had night duties linked to safety and public order. For our theme, the key is that their work was organized as routine patrol and response. Night was a time of special risk: fires, theft, fights, and accidents. A predictable, repeated presence mattered even if it could not prevent every crime. The goal was not perfect control. It was reducing uncertainty. When people know there is a regular watch at night, whether community watch or state watch, they adjust behavior. They also know what to do when danger appears: call for help, seek the watch, appeal to the authorities. Rome also shows another side of routine: administrative division. The city was divided into regions and smaller units. Assigning responsibility by district creates a repeated pattern of accountability. Even today, cities rely on districts and precincts. The concept is old. Break a large population into manageable parts, assign routine duties to each unit, and order becomes easier to maintain. Now let us move to a third setting: Edo period Japan, from the early 1600s to the mid-1800s. In Tokugawa, Japan, order was maintained through layered local administration and strong expectations of mutual monitoring. One famous example is the Gonin Gomi, often described as groups of households held collectively responsible. These groups supported tax collection and were expected to help prevent crime and disorder within the group. Again, what matters is not only the rule, but the repetition. If a system of mutual responsibility is only announced once, it will be ignored. If it is checked regularly through registers, local reporting, yearly reorganizing, and the everyday expectation that neighbors must answer for neighbors, it becomes routine. And routine changes behavior. This kind of collective structure does several things. It makes it harder to disappear. If every household is known, counted, and connected to others, strangers stand out. It makes responsibility local. Instead of waiting for distant officials, the first line of control is the neighborhood. It creates fast information. Neighbors know when something is unusual: a missing person, a suspicious visitor, a household in trouble. It also creates pressure to conform. That pressure can reduce certain kinds of crime, but it can also restrict freedom. The system is about stability, not individual choice. Now consider a fourth setting: medieval Islamic cities, where markets were central to daily life. In many cities, trade depended on trust, weights, measures, quality, prices, honest dealing. Market cheating can create disorder quickly because it ruins confidence. A known institution tied to market order was the muhtasib, a market inspector or supervisor linked to the concept of hisbah, often described as accountability in public dealings. The muhtasib's role could include checking measures and regulating certain public behaviors, especially in market spaces. Here, routine matters in a very practical way. A market is not controlled mainly by occasional dramatic punishments. It is controlled by repeated inspection, repeated expectations, and repeated enforcement of standard practices. When sellers know that measures may be checked and dishonest practices may be punished, many will follow the rules as a habit. Buyers also learn what to expect. That reduces conflict and keeps the market functioning. Now let us look at another major example of routine order: household registration and mutual responsibility systems in Imperial China. In several periods, Chinese states developed systems that grouped households and linked them to responsibility for security, reporting, and sometimes local defense. One example discussed in Chinese history is the Baojia system, used in different forms across time and associated with reforms in the Song dynasty. The details could vary by region and era, but the basic logic is familiar by now. Organize people into small groups with leaders, set duties, and use routine checks to make the system real. This kind of grouping supports order in several ways. It supports taxation. If households are known and grouped, it is harder to avoid payment. It supports policing without large numbers of professional police. The group itself becomes a tool of supervision. It supports rapid mobilization. When danger appears, small groups can assemble faster than a distant official force. Across these examples, England, Rome, Japan, Islamic cities, and China, routine keeps returning as a basic technology of order. Now let us step back and explain why routine is so effective. Routine reduces uncertainty in four main ways. First, routine creates clear expectations. In a world without fast communication, you cannot always ask, "What is the rule?" but you can remember what usually happens. If people know that a village court meets every year, they know when to bring complaints. If people know that night watch is expected, they know what suspicious behavior looks like and what response is normal. If people know that their group is jointly responsible, they know they may pay for a neighbor's choices. These expectations guide behavior even when nobody is watching. Second, routine creates social memory. When processes repeat, they become part of community knowledge. Who has authority? The constable, the headman, the inspector. Where do disputes go? To the local court, to the magistrate's session, to the market office. What happens after arrest? Holding until morning. Transport to a higher court, a fine, public punishment. Even if the system is unfair, the repeated steps form a kind of map that people can follow. Third, routine reduces the cost of enforcement. Modern policing is expensive because it relies on professionals working full-time. Many pre-modern societies could not afford that. Routine allowed them to spread the cost. Instead of paying a large force, they assigned rotating duties to community members, or they used part-time local officials. They relied on scheduled gatherings rather than constant oversight. This approach did not eliminate crime, but it provided a workable baseline of control. Fourth, routine supports legitimacy. Legitimacy does not always mean fair. It means recognized. A process that is repeated in the same way feels more official than a one-time decision. Even harsh punishments can be seen as normal if they follow known steps. When fines are assessed by known local men under oath, it signals that punishment is not purely personal revenge. When a watch arrests a stranger at night and holds them until morning, it signals that night has special rules. These signals matter because they make compliance more likely. Now we should also talk about the limits and costs of routine-based order. Routine can produce stability, but it can also produce rigidity. When systems depend on repeated duties, they often punish people who do not fit the expected pattern: outsiders, travelers, the poor, and those without strong local ties. Collective responsibility can pressure families and neighbors to police each other in ways that reduce privacy. Local officials may be unpaid or poorly trained, leading to uneven enforcement, and when a system relies heavily on community action, powerful local figures can influence outcomes. Still, even with these problems, routine systems often lasted for centuries. That endurance is a clue that they solved real practical issues. So what did investigation look like in a world built on routine? It often began with immediate local knowledge rather than specialized detectives. Neighbors knew each other's habits. Markets had regular patterns: who sold what, where, and when. Villages tracked who belonged, often through group systems and periodic inspections. When something unusual happened, the first investigation was usually social, asking known people, checking who was missing, tracing where someone should have been. Formal evidence gathering, as we understand it today, was limited. But routine created an information network. In many cases, the strongest technology of investigation was not a tool. It was familiarity. Now consider punishment in routine-based systems. In many places, punishment was designed to be visible and simple. Fines, public correction, temporary holding, physical penalties, and community shaming. This was not only about cruelty, it was about communication. A visible punishment shows the community what behavior leads to consequences. If punishment is meant to shape behavior, it must be understood. Routine also made punishment easier to administer. Stocks, cages, and other local facilities could be used repeatedly. Court sessions could assign standard penalties. Local officials could follow known steps. Again, this does not mean the system was humane. It means it was structured. Now let us connect routine to the bigger shift toward modern policing. As states grew stronger and societies became more mobile, routine systems based on tight local ties face pressure. When more people travel for work, trade, or migration, neighbors no longer know each other as well. When cities grow, a community-based watch becomes less effective. When economies become more complex, disputes multiply and require more specialized administration. In England, for example, the old system of parish constables and local responsibility continued for a long time. But over the 1800s, larger professional forces developed. This shift did not happen overnight. It was gradual and it reflected new needs. But even modern systems still rely on routine. Police patrols are routine. Court calendars are routine. Bail procedures, warrants, and hearings are routine. The difference is that modern routine is carried out mainly by paid professionals, guided by more formal rules, and supported by fast communication. So the main lesson is not that routine disappeared, it is that routine changed shape. Now let us summarize the core idea. Before modern law enforcement, order was often produced by repeated actions that everyone recognized. Communities grouped people into units of shared responsibility. They assigned rotating duties like watch and ward. They used standard emergency procedures like the hue and cry. They held courts on set days, creating a calendar of justice. They relied on inspections and administrative checks, whether in villages, neighborhoods, or markets. They used predictable penalties, often fines, that were understood as part of the system. These routines reduced uncertainty. They created stability. They formed a working structure for crime control, dispute handling, and punishment in societies where professional policing was limited or absent. Routine in this sense was not just habit. It was infrastructure. It linked ordinary people to the work of justice. It created a shared understanding of how order was maintained. And across many cultures and centuries, it provided a practical answer to the same basic question: how do you keep daily life predictable when you cannot place a modern police officer on every corner? The answer, again and again, was routine.